Hello, David Wilson.
Hello, Richard. Thank you very much for inviting me into your world.
Well, it's a pleasure and very nice to be invited into your world, into your studio space there. Your exhibition is Fragments from Another Place and Time at Defiance Gallery, Mary Place in Sydney. And just before we talk about the exhibition, as usual, a quick reminder for the viewer who's watching that the best results for this interview are if you go to the gallery website, actually find the exhibition and the works and have a look at those while listening to the conversation which David and I have, and then you'll be able to get the references to the specific works that we talk about when we do. So David, congratulations on the exhibition. All of the works in this exhibition are sculptural works which are unique painted bronze. What attracts you to this particular form of the unique painted bronze?
Well, for many years I became more interested in the sculpture's colour. I wanted to make the sculpture have a kind of atmosphere. I rather envied the atmosphere that paintings can have, and lumpy sculptures, particularly my own, didn't seem to have to the same extent. So I was drawn to colour. And I was then forced really to consider non-ferrous metals, because no matter what I did to steel sculptures, the colour wouldn't last. So I experimented with aluminiums and bronzes, and over the last few years, I've settled on bronze as my base metal. And then I paint the sculptures with auto lacquers, which are the most resilient form of paint that I've found. The reason I've gone to bronze is because many of the sculptures have very highly fine details, and aluminium wouldn't cope with that. The bronze has a strength to deal with it, whereas aluminium will fracture. And once I've got the metal cleaned up, I then set about painting it. From experience, it seems that is a long-lasting solution.
Well, it certainly provides, as you say, extraordinarily intricate, delicate, subtle structural elements, and those elements of again, very subtle colour with the painted forms. All the works in this exhibition are relatively small in scale. I think the maximum height is around about 70 centimetres or so. How important is scale, and why did you choose this scale for this exhibition of sculptures?
Well, I'm not sure that I actually choose a scale. I think the scale chooses itself. The way I work is an intuitive way, really. I work from a very loose set of notions to begin with, and the sculptures kind of make themselves as I work on them. And they grow to a certain size. I have made much larger sculptures, but they've been impossible to cast because it would take me years to finish the things off. So to some disappointment, I've had to put them in abeyance. Well, say it's not worth my time spending years and years making one very large sculpture when I'd rather make several more modest-sized sculptures.
But especially when you can bring into those modest-sized sculptures the complexity and essentially all of the ingredients that you want to be able to share.
Well, that's right. I mean, I used to make much larger sculptures in steel. And I remember when Defiance Gallery ran an exhibition, which they did for many years, the 6-inch exhibition. They invited me to make a 6-inch sculpture. I found it devilishly difficult. I just couldn't make a sculpture that was small. And I got kind of rather frustrated by this. It took me so many times to adjust to a different scale. And then the scale kind of started to interest me. I don't make tiny sculptures anymore. The sculptures, as I say, kind of grow to be their own size. I've just got a rough idea of where they're going to go. It's a notion. And then I just follow my nose.
Yes. Well, I'm certainly keen a little bit later in our conversation to talk about some of those much larger extraordinarily impressive works that you have made over the years. But keeping the focus at the moment on the works in this exhibition, as I mentioned, the title of the exhibition is Fragments from Another Place and Time. How would you actually describe these works as a body? Because they certainly do seem to be evocative almost of perhaps another world, almost frozen, fossilized moments in time with elements of organic form, geological form. What's your take?
Well, I must say the works are born of a kind of feeling, felt awareness. There's a sense of nostalgia in the works. I'm aware of that. I don't indulge it, but I'm aware that the works kind of grow from a feeling of regret or loss at something that's past and can't be retrieved. And in a way, these works are made to somehow salvage the remnants of that place and time which no longer exists.
Let's go to a very particular work, because there are obviously a number in this exhibition, and you mentioned that sense of loss, sense of emotion. One of the works is entitled "Time and Tears." There's another entitled "The Space When You Opened the Door." They do seem to have an emotional sense of reflection and nostalgia and a little regret. Is that part of the intention of the communication?
Yes, it is, Richard. Time and Tears was made in response to an amazing book I read by an Italian quantum physicist, Carlo Rovelli, called The Order of Time. And when I read this book, I didn't expect to end the book by being reduced to tears. And yet I was, because this man not only talks about quantum mechanics, he talks about our culture as well. And it was a really deeply moving conclusion to the book, where he brings in things like concepts of death, concepts of passing, temporality. I was somehow inspired by the ideas I got from Carlo Rovelli's book. So I called my sculpture Time and Tears, because finishing The Order of Time left me in tears.
Well, there's a great book recommendation as well for anybody watching and listening, as well as obviously looking at the sculpture themselves. And that other intriguing title, which I just referred to, the Space When You Opened the Door.
Yes, it's rather like the sculpture Imagined Landscape with Fire. It's like opening the door from the world we're in at the present into another world, into a world that you might prefer to be in, really, or a world that conjures up memories of many lost things that you love and cherish.
I'd like to go to another one again. You referred earlier to to that sense, or that sense of perhaps opening the door to another place or time. Every step of the way, there is a tremendous sense of organic form anchored perhaps in rock, ancient fir trees clinging onto a rock, or kelp on a rocky seabed with moving water around them. I mean, these are just things that occur to me as an evocation. But what do you see as you are constructing and responding to the work in the process of creation?
Well, you were right earlier on that the things do sort of allude to natural forms, fossilized things, landscapes, and that particular sculpture is, I'd have to say, it's a landscape sculpture. It's a landscape through which we can move, we can walk. I'm motivated by many things, and this particular sculpture was motivated by a photograph I found in a travel magazine of a sort of forest scene. And when I saw the photograph, I thought, there's a sculpture in there for me. And so I started work on it without any definite idea really, but just the feeling that I got from looking at the photograph that led me along the path to conclude the sculpture. And then I thought every step of the way is a way of saying that we could walk through this landscape if we wished.
Many of the sculptures in this exhibition feel as though they are parts of landscapes that one could occupy. Part of the delight of them is that as you get closer and you both in a tactile way and a visual way engage more and more with the surfaces, you simply want to become immersed in that environment which they occupy. Do you, in the sense of the process of creation, go into that world, that slightly different world, and become part of it while you're making these objects?
Yes, I think I do. I have a sort of a rather intimate relationship with the work I'm working on. And as I say in my artist statement, I think on the introduction to the Defiance exhibition, the decisions I make are based on what I've done and do, make me feel about what I've done and do. So I have to have an emotional response to what the work I'm working on. And in Bob Dylan's words, if it ain't right, it's wrong. So if it ain't right, it gets chucked out and something else is brought in to replace it, which is right.
Well,
being right, it makes me feel the right way.
Yes, yes. Well, and those simple words from Bob Dylan seem to apply perfectly to that process. In fact, I wanted to take you to one or two of the words that you offered in the introduction to the exhibition at Defiance, because you say, just reading some of your words here, that your art doesn't set out to say things. I want it to stand as a kind of noun for an otherwise indefinable set of feelings, which sounds as though you are, in a sense, trying to make emotions into a tangible, concrete form.
That's right. I like the idea of my sculpture. I said I want my sculpture to have an atmosphere like a painting. I want my sculpture to perform like a symphony or a quartet. I want it to be an experience, not something that can be interpreted and read, but something that can be felt, a real presence. There are two Susans that had a great deal of effect on me. There was Susan Langer, the philosopher, and Susan Sontag, the critic, I suppose you'd say, the writer and critic. Susan Langer wrote a series of philosophy books, culminating in a book called Feeling and Form, where she talked about the power of the aesthetic. And Susan Sontag wrote a marvelous essay called Against Interpretation, which was saying to people that you must open up to the real presence, in George Steiner's words, of what the artwork is about.
So they were obviously quite influential in terms of your thinking, and going to influences, going back a long, long way now, through the process of the evolution of your work. I know in the past you've mentioned Caro and Brancusi, I think, at least as a couple of influences. Who have been the sort of people who have had the most influence creatively over time?
Well, there's been so many, actually, Richard. Philip King, Nancy Graves, David Smith. It's just, they're too numerous, really, but they're all piling up in the back of my mind as I speak. When I'm working in the studio, it's almost as if I've got a whole audience of those I revere looking over my shoulder.
That's actually a wonderfully evocative image, but I guess it does have that evolutionary effect over a period of time as those influences come to play, because your work has changed so much over the many years now that you've been creating it. Your very early sculptures, or some of those very early sculptures, were really, how can one say it, often quite scientifically based, even with elements of light. You used a lot of perspex and various other plastic forms. You even described them as being a little science fiction-like at one time. And then there were those very, very extremely solid, large steel sculptures, and now we see the delicacy of these works in this present exhibition. Tell us a little about the trajectory of that journey, of that evolution.
Well, like so many young artists, you start off by stealing as much as you can and turning it into your own work. And as a young artist, I did that. If I saw something that another artist had done that I thought was of use to me, I'd nick it and turn it into my own work. And gradually, all these kinds of influences just get absorbed into your own visual language. And now, even though I've got an audience of the people I revere looking over my shoulder, I don't go to them for answers. I just know that I've got to keep up their quality.
And just listening to you then, that was a wonderful message in terms of explaining to people perhaps how that process happens. But you have explained to many, many young artists over the years in your teaching capacity, because you've been such an important part of the Victorian College of the Arts for many, many years. How important has teaching been to you? And is that the sort of message that you would pass on?
Oh yes, teaching was very important to me. I used to say that I learn more from the students I'm teaching than I actually impart to them, because you're constantly having to test your own ideas if you're going to speak to other people about the ideas they're making. And so this really puts you on your mettle if you're going to do it properly.
Let's go to another couple of works. Everywhere and Nowhere, and For a Perfect Time. And both of those works seem to me, again, looking at them, to have implicitly a sense of heft and a certain sense of grandeur, as though they almost could be huge works. That sense seemed to link into some of the larger, more organic sculptures that I've seen of yours. Even some of the motifs could be the same. Was there a sense of that for you at all?
No, I don't think so. I think that I said I had difficulty making a 6-inch sculpture because I think scale is implicit to the, let's say, personality of the sculpture. It's not something that can be adjusted and fiddled about with. I think some terrible sculptures have been made by things this size being handed on to some factory somewhere and turned out to be 20 feet high, with the artist losing control of proportions. And I think the scale is really important in that sort of regard. I don't think that any of my sculptures can really change their scales without needing to be reworked somehow, having all the decisions that I've made about them somehow revisited and revised.
That's extremely interesting, because it does reinforce what you were saying earlier about that sense of scale being implicit in the nature of the work. But looking at a couple of larger works, and there's that superb one outside Quagoma in Brisbane, Hope Sleeping, Grand Disguise. That's a wonderful sculpture. Tell us how it came to end up in front of that institution in Brisbane.
Well, I was commissioned by the curator at the time to make a sculpture for their water mall in the Brisbane Art Gallery. And as I say, my sculptures kind of grow on their own. I don't do designs and working drawings for sculptures. They're things that just have to happen. So I gave the curator a couple of things I call atmospheric sketches about what could possibly occur if I was commissioned to make a sculpture for the water mall. And they were adventurous enough and kind enough to say, go ahead and do it. So I had this idea of making something, well, about the size that I did make. And I got a gantry stuck outside my big, gloomy tin shed down the front of the land, and started work. and to see where I would go. How did I start? I think I got hold of a large curving lump of steel, which it forms the kind of the face of the sculpture, you might say. Put a vertical plate camp on it and hoisted it up to be a height that I thought was the right height. I just thought it was the right height. Then I started working around that thing to see where it would lead me. It wasn't an easy sculpture to make, Richard, by any means, and I made a lot of errors and chopped bits off, and they're still lying around down outside my workshop. Bits that I thought were okay, they turned out not to be okay, so out came the oxyacetylene, off they went. And in the end, I worked out that I'd finished it. I got it where I wanted it to be, and it was finished. There was no more I could do to it. It stood up and looked back at me and said, "I'm here."
And it certainly does occupy that space superbly. How do the different materials for your sculpture construction, I guess, what do they give you? What different elements do they give you? If you're working in bronze, or if you're working in steel, what sort of different quality does that give you to the nature or the motivation for the work and the scale of it?
Well, I say I have to enter into a really intimate relationship with the materials and processes that I'm dealing with. They're never a kind of arbitrary and distant. They're all part of it. They're just part of my thinking. I work on this sort of stuff here. This is a sculpture growing at the moment. It's hardly started. And these are bits of wood and hot glue and things like this, and it'll grow into a form. I've got a rough idea where it's going to go. And when I think I've got it into a rough idea where it's going to go, I'll prepare it for the foundry, I'll get it put into bronze, and then I'll make some more decisions about it. Once it's in bronze, of course, it's got a different personality, and I need to work the bronze to get it to where I want it to be, to finish it, and then paint it. So these relationships between processes, myself, and the material I'm working with are intimate, they're not arbitrary.
It's fascinating hearing you speak so precisely about those step-by-step processes, and I'm fascinated to know what, in a sense, what moves and motivates the process of creativity for you now. You have been making outstanding sculptures, for decades. What is the process that really pushes you towards those complex and sustained creative efforts now?
It's a good question. I don't know that I can give you a proper answer. It could be that I can't think of anything else to do. It could be that I don't feel complete unless I've got something in front of me that I'm working on. It could be that what I did yesterday prompts what I'm going to do today. It could be something as simple as I just love making it, and I love looking at art.
Well, that process of continuity over long periods of time brings us perhaps to the final work as we conclude this chat. Forever by My Side seems the perfect title to finish with. What can you tell us about that work, rather than me making any observations? How do you feel about that particular work?
Well, look, it's another nostalgic work, as you can probably guess. It's to do with loss, and to do with kind of trying to salvage something from the loss. It grew out of some personal experiences, I won't go into them now, that I underwent. And it just seemed to be something I wanted to make. I made it, and it was speaking back to me. It looked back at me and told me what its name should be.
Well, as people look at this exhibition, whether they look at it on the website or whether they go into the gallery and engage personally, and of course in these strange times, very, very carefully with appropriate social distancing. But however the relationship with these sculptures, I hope that they find the sculptures speaking to them as they have clearly conversed with you and you with them in their creation. But David Wilson, thank you so much for sharing your exhibition with us.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much.